So whether you're brand new in video production or you've been doing it for a while, one of the things that you will constantly tackle and try to evaluate on a regular basis is the storage situation. Files from cameras are not getting any smaller, they're only going to get bigger and bigger, and trying to manage them all and keep track of where they all are and be able to somehow do it at a reasonable price is something that can be very tricky, very confusing. And for the last bunch of years, as I've run a video production company, I've changed things around quite a bit, but at the core, it still is pretty similar to what I've been doing for years, and it works pretty well for us. A few years ago, I did a video all about my actual storage setup and how I manage all the files that we create here at Scaling Creative, and I figured I might as well update it and tell you what we're doing now, and if it's working, and if it's something I'd recommend. So let me walk you through our entire storage workflow for everything we do as a video production company. So my company Scaling Creative is basically a content creation company like so many video production companies, but one of the things that we do very often is work with ongoing clients on a regular basis. So we aren't usually just importing footage, editing something, and kind of getting rid of the footage and hoping that they hire us again. We're working regularly with companies on a regular basis, monthly, weekly, and we're always pulling footage from things from a while back. Sometimes we're pulling things from years back. And so our situation may be a little different than yours if you are not someone that has recurring clients. But for someone like us that has a lot of recurring clients, it's important for us to be able to access that stuff as quick as possible, but not have it be taken up by a lot of costs internally, but also having the safety of it being externally on some sort of server. So it's a little bit confusing to maintain, but we've kind of come up with a solution that works pretty well for us. Though it's not perfect, it's somewhat affordable, and it works really well for most of the stuff that we do. It really only consists of three things: portable little SSDs that we go from computer to computer when we're actually editing. The second thing is a RAID type of system that is not server-based, but is just a large hard drive system that we can easily access and pull stuff from and transfer to the SSDs that we're doing editing from. And then the third thing is an online server-based thing, which we're currently using a business version of Google Drive, which we simply archive all the footage that we shoot on there. So let me break it down. So each and every time that we film anything, whether it's a small project or a big project, our process is the same. We try to keep it as much of a formula as possible so that things don't get missed, footage doesn't get lost, and cards don't get formatted that weren't supposed to be formatted yet. Every single time we come back from a shoot, we bring it to this little location here. This is kind of like our community computer. No one works on this computer on a regular basis, but this computer is basically connected to all the RAID systems and all the larger in-house hard drives that we use for all the footage. The reason we use this as kind of a community computer is because, number one, it's connected to all the large hard drives, so no one has to constantly plug into big hard drives to be able to access footage. But more importantly, since no one's ever here, we have like a big SD reader here that has a lot of SDs simultaneously that you can import footage on. So if we get back from a big shoot that had 3 or 4 cameras plus audio sources and all that, you can plug them all in at the same time, let them all import, go back to your desk, start getting to work on other stuff while everything's importing to a library depending on where it's actually at. This makes it much easier instead of doing one card at a time on a personal computer and having to wait for it to import. This is where we can just come, plug in SSDs, or just have the hard drives already plugged into it, import everything, and we're good to go. As soon as all the footage is actually imported and safely copied from all the SD cards to a hard drive of some sort, we then reveal in Finder so that we can see all the original source files, and we upload every single file that we create in a very organized structure onto Google Drive. We currently have the Google Drive Business Suite, and as a Business Suite customer, it basically means that you get unlimited storage on the Google Drive. That is super useful to us because we currently are up to 70 terabytes of footage that is actually on the Google Drive. Now, we do not use Google Drive to be able to actually edit from, nor do we need it to be a certain speed to even have that capability. It's simply for archival sake. All the stuff that is stored on Google Drive is basically all the same stuff that for the most part we have locally with different hard drives. But in the crazy event that all of our hard drives failed, or there was a fire or whatever happened and we lost everything, we actually have backups of it all on Google Drive. Now, sure, if something happened crazy, we wouldn't necessarily have all the project files that we're working on, but we're hoping that doesn't happen. But worst case scenario, we're not having to actually reshoot anything. We would just have to maybe do some re-editing on a couple of projects. We like Google Drive or that type of system much better than just something like Backblaze or one of those crash plan things that is basically backing up a hard drive itself, because it's very easy to just go to Google Drive, watch files in there in real time, share a specific file with someone, or just download a certain file really quickly and be able to access that file again. If you use one of those kind of automated backup systems for your actual hard drives, it's kind of more of a cumbersome process, and it's not as easy to just pull directly a file you're looking for or a folder you're looking for. It's definitely a little bit more bulky and annoying. We really like Google Drive because you can just access it so easy on any device and get files. So every single file that we've ever shot for Scaling Creative is backed up on the Google Drive in an organized folder structure where you have the actual client, you have their exports, you have their original media, you have any sort of assets that we need for them like logo files, and all that is all stored very organized on a Google Drive. Every single client is set up exactly the same, so any of the editors that is working together on any project, we instantly know where we can go to find clips and be able to get them very quickly if they're not on a hard drive that we're currently using. Then we get to a local aspect, which are the hard drives in-house. So there are a couple main hard drives that we use where everything is basically pulled from. We have a Drobo over here. The Drobo is about 36 terabytes. I've actually had the Drobo for a while. That is now dedicated solely to my wedding production company, which is 4LC Studios, where we house all of our weddings that are basically within the last year or so. So any wedding that's happened within the last year still stays locally in case we need to re-edit something or pull footage for something like a doc film or whatever. And then after a year, those come off the Drobo entirely and they go in Google Drive and they remain there and they're not local at all. So in the event that we had to pull something from an old wedding, we would just download the entire thing again from Google Drive. I will say I've had some issues with the Drobo in the past, so it's not really a system that I actually can recommend anymore. It's had a couple of hard drive failures. It has times where it just doesn't want to connect to the computer at all, so it can somewhat be frustrating. Not a huge fan of it anymore, but because it still works and it still operates like normal most of the time, it's what we use now for 4LC Studios. But like I said, we're always backing everything up, including weddings, on Google Drive as well. So everything is stored there. In the event that we ever have a hard drive failure, we can always get things back. The drive that we are now using for Scaling Creative is this OWC Mercury Elite Pro Quad USB-C drive. This drive is actually a 24 terabyte drive, but it's about 18 terabytes usable because when you are using a RAID system, it's not full capacity available because everything's backing up like onto other drives. And if you don't understand RAID, you can research it more. But in a nutshell, this is about 18 terabytes of usable space. Now, 18 terabytes of usable space is, for the most part, usually pretty filled up on these hard drives because of the fact that, like I said, we do a lot of ongoing work where we need to pull stuff regularly, so we're not always deleting everything off of here. But the only thing that really stays on these drives are clients that we really are currently working with or have worked with very recently. If we work with the client for a bunch of months and then we stop working with them and we haven't worked with them for a bunch of months after that, we will delete everything off the hard drives. We still have access to it, like I said, in Google Drive. That's kind of one of the perks that we talk about with our clients, is that as a recurring ongoing client, we always have access to continue to pull stuff from the previous things that we've filmed, so it makes it easier and quicker for us to edit those things rather than having to re-pull them off of Google Drive to kind of start back over with that. This hard drive so far has actually been awesome to us. It's a USB-C drive and it actually has pretty decent speeds, so we don't edit off of this drive on a regular basis, but in the event that we had to edit something quick that was on there and we didn't want to have to transfer everything to an SSD, as I'll talk about in a second, it is plenty fast enough just to be able to work on. It's much faster than the Drobo was, and the actual transfer speeds of footage from one drive to the next to the SSDs is much, much faster, and it works really well. I've been really happy with these drives so far. They've been super reliable. I've had this one for over a year and a half, and I've had no issues, and I've also bought this same one for a previous client, had them use it, and they've had no issues. So these are working really, really well for us, and I'm very happy with them. And then these two drives you see up here are just basically drives I've had for a long time, but they are G drives. They are 4 terabytes a piece. They are just USB 3. They are 7200 RPM drives, so they're nothing crazy fast, but all these are actually for are direct backups, which are about weekly backups of the actual SSDs, which I will explain more about on a regular basis. So these are kind of just backing up our working drives on a regular basis, where these are more archival and things that we're not editing on a regular basis, but we want to still have access to. And then the SSDs are what we actually edit off of. This whole hard drive system is only running to a very basic Mac Mini. So it only has 8 gigs of RAM. It's only a 6-core i5 processor. So it's only about a $600 machine. But like I said, because we're not really worried about the processing power for this, and really this is just a unit that all the hard drives can plug into and be accessible, this computer does not have to be anything fancy. It's plenty fast enough for the everyday edit to just do something, but obviously doesn't compare to the computers that we use on a regular basis for editing. And this just stays here all the time. It's always on, it's always accessible, it's hardwired to the internet, so it's plenty fast enough for everything that we do. It has wireless mouse and keyboard directly connected to it. And then we all have our own mouses that we can just come over here and press a button on our mouses and connect our regular mouses to this computer if we want to work. But for the most part, we're not usually working here. There's usually no one here. And one more very important note about this specific unit over here. This is running into a battery backup system. I highly recommend that your computer that is actually running your hard drives or your RAID systems or things that are always running should absolutely be on a battery backup system. If you don't know what a battery backup system is, basically everything in this entire desk is being powered into this, and then this runs into the wall. In the event that you have a power outage, this continues to run and none of the hard drives will actually have to be turned off. That's super important because if all your hard drives are working and running or doing tasks of any sort and you have a power outage and it completely shuts down everything, that is not good for hard drives at all. You really are supposed to eject hard drives correctly, and when you suddenly have them lose power and go off, it can permanently damage drives. So I definitely recommend that you have a battery backup for any of your main hard drives that are plugged in. If you're using things like SSDs or a laptop, you're okay, because obviously if power runs out of those or power goes out, the computer itself still has a battery, and so it's still going to operate like normal. But these kind of drives, something like a Mac Mini, something like these hard drives that are not bus powered, meaning they have to have a power supply, I highly recommend that you have a battery backup. Once everything is imported and once we are ready to actually get to work editing, that's where these come in, the Samsung T5 SSDs. Now they make even faster versions of these now, but these are still the USB-C versions that we've had maybe for about a year or so. And we have 5 of them. They're absolutely identical, and each one of them is 2 terabytes a piece. So I think these run for about $350 a piece, $400, I don't know, something like that. But this is what we use for all of our editing. We have 5 identical ones, and each one of them is specifically labeled SC, SSD, and a number. We use a Trello board to be able to simply keep track of what projects are on what SSD, and that way if you were assigned a project to edit, you can go to that Trello board, see exactly what SSD it is on, and then you grab that SSD and you can actually get to work. Normally we're doing our best to make sure that whoever is working on a certain project on a certain SSD has all the stuff in that SSD that they would need to work on, so that you're not having a situation midday where a certain editor needs to grab footage from a different SSD that they don't have. If we're trying to assign someone multiple projects during a day, we make sure that all those projects are living on the current SSD. So there are definitely multiple times a week that we are sometimes rotating things from one SD to the other, or from the main hard drive to another SSD. We're making it as quick as possible and as efficient as possible to be able to make sure that once someone plugs this SSD into their computer, for the most part, they can use that SSD for the majority of the day, unless they absolutely need to change something around, or if a task gets assigned to someone else, then they can grab the SSD that corresponds to it. Since these are 2 terabytes a piece, most of the SSDs have at least 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 or 5 clients on a specific SSD. Now, some of our clients that we've been working with for years that have a ton of footage might have one whole SSD just for them because they have up to 2 terabytes of footage. And if we are always pulling from that footage, then we want to obviously make sure that it's easily accessible. We don't want to have just the bare minimum on this drive and have someone need to go to that main community computer every single time that they're pulling footage. footage. So if we can keep everything on a certain SSD that one person can use, then that's nice and easy. In the event that we have a specific client that is so large they can't even fit on a 2 terabyte drive, we usually will break up the actual library itself to contain different things. Maybe we have one that is nothing but B-roll for that client, one that is more of like certain projects that are currently being worked on, whatever. But for the most part, everyone fits on their own SSD, and we can usually fit a couple of clients on each SSD. Now these kind of to me are on like a life cycle of about 2 to 3 years before they usually end up getting replaced, not because they aren't fast enough anymore. They don't really slow down. We haven't had any issues at all with these SSDs, but naturally space gets cheaper and cheaper. So where these right now are about $350 or $400 for 2 terabytes, in about a year or two, it'll probably be $350 or $400 for 8 terabytes. And naturally, as files get bigger and bigger on computers and on the actual cameras, the more space you can have that still does the same job is better. So I usually will try to get newer drives every couple of years if the space ends up being cheaper for the price. Now the important thing to note about the way that we're doing things is that if this is the main library that an editor is working off of, then all of the edits and all the things that they're doing on a regular basis with all that footage really is only stored in one place at that given time. So if an editor spends an entire week editing tons and tons of stuff for a specific client on this specific SSD, this SSD needs to be backed up as well, because if you don't back up this SSD, it doesn't matter if you still have all the original footage, you can lose all of the edits that someone actually worked a lot of time on if something happens to this one SSD. So remember I was talking about these drives specifically, these 4 terabyte G drives, that's where these come into play. So as you see, when I plug an SSD into this computer, it shows up on the desktop here, SC SSD number 3. Now you see these 2 drives here, SSD backup 1 and SSD backup 2, they're 4 terabytes apiece, so each one of them can back up 2 full 2 terabyte SSDs. So SSD backup number 1 backs up SSD 1 and 2, SSD backup 2 backs up SSD 3 and 4. Now what works really nice is we use a program called ChronoSync. We've been using this for many years, and what ChronoSync allows us to do is basically clone that SSD identically to another drive and synchronize all the changes and all the deletions between the two. That's really helpful because it doesn't make us have to actually like copy and paste and replace everything that was in the drive and figure out what changed and do we need to delete this or empty the trash here. It basically can be set up to just synchronize all deletions between the two. So when we back up SSD 3 to SSD backup number 2, for example, it's copying every aspect of the folder structure directly that is mirrored on the actual drive. So it's not like a backup copy where we have to dig into folders to try to find like where the backups are. It's basically mirroring it. And what that allows you to do is when I go into the actual SSD in ChronoSync, I can set up all that stuff in advance. So you can see here how I can say synchronize deletions and it's going left to right. So the root folder of SSD3, which is the entire folder in its exact form, gets backed up directly to the folder that I have labeled SSD backup number 2 right on here. So everything that happens in this drive, including deletions, gets removed from the backup as well when it syncs over. So then all we have to do is plug in SSD number 3 to this computer, open up ChronoSync, and simply run this selected task right here, synchronize. It gets to work and it basically mirrors it identically. Now what's cool about ChronoSync is the fact that when it actually is syncing from left to right to that, it's only syncing up anything that has changed since the last time it backed up. So you're not having to every single time back up 2 terabytes worth of stuff. If you basically only used one specific client project over the course of the week before you maybe back that up again, it only will back up and change that one specific client. Or maybe you only touched 1 or 2 files inside of a different client. It's only going to look for what has changed from the last time you did it. So you're not having to wait hours on end to transfer 2 terabytes every single time that you plug it in. It might only do 150 gigs, it might do 50 gigs, it might do every bit of it depending on how much has changed. But I really like the setup because it's pretty easy to just plug in the hard drives, synchronize them, get them, and know that in the event that one of the SSDs failed, all that hard work that you put into all the edits, you're only going to lose at max a couple of days depending on how often you actually back that up. It's our goal to try to back it up at least once a week, but if we do a ton of edits on a specific client, sometimes I recommend that we do it even sooner because you always have a backup. Like I said, we're never worried about losing the actual footage that we shot, but the edits are really what takes the longest, and we'd hope to not have to redo all the edits we worked hard on because one specific drive failed. Now, if you only have one computer and all those RAID systems and all the SSDs plugged in simultaneously, you can actually use a program like ChronoSync to automatically back up at certain times. So let's say you have one computer, a desktop, where the SSDs are always plugged into, you're running off of them, and you have your RAID system as well. You could make it so that every day from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., if those drives are present, it will do that whole backup process entirely by itself, so you're never having to worry about it. I used to do that regularly when I only worked by myself because I always had the drives connected. The way that we do it now, the editor would obviously have to come and plug it into this and then run that manual sync since it's not always in there at a certain time, but that is convenient. You also can make it set up so that every single time you plug it in, it runs the task right away as soon as you plug it in. Now, we don't have it do that because we might not necessarily want to be backing it up, and we might want to actually pull something that we messed up on and grab it from the SSD backup first before it syncs. So you can set it up however you want, but that application, ChronoSync, super useful. So I think that basically covers our entire setup. 3 things: Google Drive to archive everything, big RAID systems to archive all the stuff that we probably will use in the next 3 to 6 months, and the SSDs to use on a regular basis for all of our editing. The workflow is pretty simple and easy to understand, but I think it really works well for the type of work that we do, where we have safety of backups, but speed and reliability for the edits that we're doing on a regular basis, and we have backups of everything. So Google Drive is somewhat backing up all the RAID systems. The other drives are backing up the SSDs, so you kind of have redundancies. Redundancies is the name of the game when it comes to anything in storage, because no matter how reliable you think your computer is or a hard drives can fail. They will fail inevitably, and being able to have a backup of everything you do is so important. I cannot stress that enough. So a lot of people have asked me in the past, why don't I use any sort of server-based hard drive system so that we're not having to transfer SSDs back and forth and we basically can access everything at all times. And there are kind of a couple of reasons behind that. The first, most important reason behind it is the fact that a local base drive that would really do that really well that I've gotten priced out is very expensive. But beyond the cost, it kind of becomes a little tricky if you are not always editing locally at this location. So I got a couple of things priced out to do something like a Jellyfish or some sort of server setup where we'd have access at all times to everything, no need for any additional SSDs, and the system would work amazing. The problem is we don't always work from the office. There are times that I'm gone for maybe a week at a time, and so I might not even have the editors work here at all. They may work from home. COVID was a good example of that as well. And if you don't have unbelievably fast internet at all the locations, that becomes a little tricky. It's also a little tricky with our situation because we currently use Final Cut Pro 10, and the way that Final Cut Pro works is it has libraries and everything lives inside those libraries, and you can only open one library simultaneously. So it wouldn't work very well if we had multiple editors trying to work off the same client, because you can't open that library in multiple locations at the same time the way that Final Cut's set up. They don't have a really good collaborative workflow. So because that's still the editor that we use right now, because we still like it the best for the work that we do, the server thing, while it could be really beneficial in certain aspects, it just doesn't seem like it justifies yet the cost for what it would actually be for us. Once they can really maybe figure out their collab workflow better, it might be consideration, but as of now, the setup that we currently have just makes more sense. So thanks for watching. As always, I hope this video was somewhat helpful to you. Comment below if you have any questions. I'd be happy to try to answer them in the best way possible. And I always like to know, what systems are you using? Are you using one similar to us? Are you thinking that there might be something that I'm completely missing that would make it even more efficient for me? Let me know. I'm always looking to learn and grow and continue to improve in everything that I do, especially efficiency. So thanks as always for watching. Keep crushing it.